like to call the July 14th, 2011 meeting of the Williamsburg City Council to order. Ms. Scott, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Newtson.
Here.
Mr. Pons.
Here.
Mayor Holman.
Here.
Mr. Fryling.
Here.
Mr. Foster.
Here.
Our first order of business today is council minutes. We have minutes for the June 6th and June 9th, 2011 meetings, and the special meetings of June 2nd, June 6th, and June 8th, 2011. Any additions or corrections?
Mr. Mayor, I move that council approve the minutes from the June 6th and June 9th, 2011 meetings and the special meetings of June 2nd, June 6th, and June 8th, 2011.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Newtson.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Mr. Fryling.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Our next order of business is one of those special times that is a joy for the city. This is a matter of special privilege, and it's an Excellence in Service to Williamsburg Award. And we're going to present this to Communications Specialist Kate Hoving. Kate, would you come forward and join me at the microphone? This is a particularly joyful time for the city because it's a time that we recognize one of our own, and what makes this particularly special is that it comes from colleagues. So it's important for the city, it's important for our employees, and it's particularly important for Kate Hoving today. And I have a proclamation to read, and then we have an award to present to you, and then we'll give you a chance to speak. This is the City of Williamsburg takes pleasure in recognizing Catherine J. Hoving for excellence in service to Williamsburg. Kate Hoving has served the City of Williamsburg with dedication and enthusiasm over the past 2.5 years as the city's first communications specialist. A consummate professional, Kate works to make the city more transparent and engage citizens in the work of local government. Her outreach efforts using the city's website and social media have made the city more accessible and relevant in today's technological world. Kate has improved content on Williamsburg's Channel 48 and tirelessly interacts with local, regional, and national media. Kate supports the work of other city departments and teams by developing and implementing innovative public information initiatives for special projects like the Northeast Triangle Focus Group, the Arts District Focus Group, the Blatant Elderly Housing Development Project, and the city's Green Team. Serving as the city's public information officer, Kate ensures that timely and accurate service information and emergency advisories are provided to the public. Kate is a highly engaged team player who helps others in the city receive recognition and shine. She has the true heart and work ethic of an outstanding public servant. Kate Hoving is hereby recognized for her commitment to excellence in keeping with the best traditions of public service in the City of Williamsburg, and this is signed by me as mayor and Jackson C. Tuttle as city manager. Kate. We also have something to go on your wall.
I'll just take a second. Mark Barham told me I should be profound and not cry, and I'm probably going to do neither. So I just want to say thank you to my colleagues, to the council, to the residents. I remember when I took this job, Steve Vaughn called me and he said, "What are you expecting with the job?" And I reread it recently, and it said that I was looking forward to working with Jack Tuttle and Jody Miller, and I have learned so much from both of them, and I have enjoyed it. But what I sensed but didn't really expect how much I've enjoyed working with all the staff in every department, how much support I've had, and how talented and hardworking they are. It's really an honor to be working for them and for the residents who've been welcoming and taking me in. And it's been a difficult year for my family, and the city has just been wonderful. And they're wonderful to all of their own, so I'm thanking you. I appreciate it, and it wasn't profound or teachable, but it's profound to me, and I'm grateful. Thank you.
Congratulations again, Kate. That's terrific. Our next order of business is a public hearing, and this is a public hearing to amend the text of the zoning ordinance to revise provisions relating to the Chesapeake Bay preservation for site plans. This is proposed ordinance 11-13. Looks like Ms. Murphy's going to...
Mayor Holman and members of council, I'm here again today to present, we hope, the last amendment to our ordinance requirements to add in our site plan section, this one section on that the Chesapeake Bay organization is requiring us to add in our ordinance based on their review last fall and their formal review this year in April. And I came before you in March, I believe, with a couple of ordinance changes, and since then they did our formal review and noted that we had neglected to put in one small section in there that they forgot to tell us about, which is the site plan that notes that the note needs to be put on the site plan that the RPA is limited to water-dependent facilities, redevelopment, or uses specifically allowed by Section 21-18 of the zoning ordinance. So I'm here today to ask you to approve that amendment. Planning Commission had their review last month, and they voted 6-0 to approve the proposed ordinance 11-13, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Before I open the public hearing, does anybody on council have any questions for staff? Okay, with that, I'll open the public hearing, and anyone who wishes to come forward to speak to this matter may do so now. If you do, please state your name and address. Seeing no takers, I'll close the public hearing and come back to council for any comments or questions or a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move the approval of proposed ordinance 1113.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Dutzen?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Freiling?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Next order of business is reports. The first, the monthly financial statements. Jack, is there anything in particular you'd like to point out?
Yes, sir. In just a moment, Mr. Sarah will talk through these in more detail, but I did want to take this opportunity to say that within the past week and a half, we've come to the end of a 5-year contract with our bank, and so the city, as we did 5 years ago, has gone out into the marketplace with a request for proposals, and so that is out now, and we anticipate it will come back, be reviewed by the Finance Audit Committee, and a recommendation will come to council in September into the city's banking relationships. The second thing I wanted to mention is that the Investment Committee met yesterday. The Investment Committee is composed of Mr. Pons, representing City Council, former council members Steve Harris and myself, and we looked at alternatives to the local government investment pool, where the city now has the majority of its funds placed through collateralized certificates of deposit and a collateralized insured money market program that's like the certificate of deposit. And so, again, an RFP was put out. A number of banks responded. The Investment Committee discussed that and has directed the staff and Mr. Sarah to shift a good deal of the city's money from the local government investment pool to this a mix of certificates of deposit and collateralized money market with a number of 2 different institutions. So simply wanted to let you all know that.
What's the differential in returns on the pool versus the new?
Right now, the pool is paying about 0.1%, and the collateralized CD in the 18-month time frame is 1%. And the money market is right now 0.75%. So it's fairly significant in those ranges.
And by collateralizing those, it ensures FDI insurance across
that means all the city's funds will be federally insured, fully in compliance with the city's investment policy.
Great. Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Pons, and thank you, Mr. Tuttle, and thank Mr. Harris for us, too, for looking after our money. Thanks.
So that's all on the
Okay,
financial
on the
report.
financial report. What about monthly operating reports?
Yes, one thing I wanted to mention is that Tuesday of next week, we have the 2011 Surrey Nuclear Power Plant drill. This is a major drill. It involves jurisdictions, Williamsburg, James City County, York County, Newport News, any jurisdiction within 10 miles of the plant. And it will involve city employees from every department, about a 6-hour drill that day. FEMA people will be in here to observe and to grade, along with the representatives from Dominion Power, of course, who own the plant and are responsible for its safety. So that's coming up next week.
Any questions or comments on the operating report?
No, sir.
Mr. Clayton, how's the reservoir doing? Yeah, right, yeah, that's way off. Okay, next is city manager reports, and we have two. The first is the license to the College of William and Mary for use of utility lines in city streets.
Yes, the city attorney will give this report.
Periodically, the College of William and Mary finds it necessary to run lines in city rights-of-way and under city streets. City Council has granted in the past specific licenses, and those are listed in the memorandum to Council. Several months ago, the college approached the city and requested permission to put a line on Mount Vernon Avenue between the School of Education and the parking area where the helipad used to be. At that time, we thought that it might be appropriate for City Council to consider a general license, so these individual lines don't have to be considered by Council. The college would still have to come to the city for a right-of-way permit, and so all of the plans would have to be approved by the Department of Public Works. The proposed license that Council has in front of it is for 5 years. It's self-renewing. It doesn't require a public hearing because it's not for a period of greater than 5 years. Mr. Clayton is here if you have any specific questions regarding the current project proposed. The license is only for streets that are adjacent to the college campus, so it would not be for all city streets, but only those where the college might need to run a line under the street because it's connecting one side of the street to the other with campus. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
So this really creates a convenience for both the college and the city in regularizing the way this is done.
Yes, it does.
And what's the definition of adjacent street? Is
Next
that
to or
contiguous
bounded
to?
by.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
I just have one question. What is the potential downside of having a more broad or broadly based agreement or license arrangement? I mean, what is it we're trying to prevent, prohibit, protect anybody from?
Well, the license is something that the city has done for the last several years as opposed to an easement, which grants an actual fee in the property. Having a license gives the city a little more control over how things are done and when they're done in the planning stage of the process. There really isn't... This provides the city with the ability to regulate where the lines go and how they go in, so there's not really a downside. It just means that City Council doesn't have to approve each individual project if it's something simple like an electrical line or, in this case, a telecommunications line that would go in.
So the question with the whole licensing arrangement is not whether or not the line should be put in to begin with. It's more about how it's executed so it creates the least amount of disruption for the community?
That's correct.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
When we talk about offering or issuing licenses for other entities to put their utilities underground, sometimes there's associated fees that they pay to the city, or in the case of James City County just recently, we were the beneficiaries of upgraded cable lines or Cox communication lines. Anything of that nature in this licensing agreement?
Other than what they're required to provide under the right-of-way process, no.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Do I have? A motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move that City Council approve and authorize the city manager to execute the agreement dated July 14, 2011, between the City of Williamsburg and the College of William and Mary, granting a 5-year general license to locate utility lines and facilities in city streets and rights-of-ways, subject to the conditions contained in such agreement.
Second. I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Mr. Fryling.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye. Our next report is the year-end financial report.
Mr. Sarah will give this report.
Good afternoon, Mayor Holman and members of council. It's that time of year. We'll go ahead and recap fiscal year 2011. We'll talk about where we were on a cash basis with revenues and expenditures, give you some projections on what both of those things that need to be accrued over the next over July and August, give you an estimate on the general fund reserves, and then go through the graph that you've seen a few years now showing the trends in expenditures and revenues. As far as operating revenues, and these are on a cash basis, all of these are included in your monthly financial report. The categories are a bit different, but the totals are exactly the same. $613,000 over budget for revenues for the year on a cash basis. Part of that was related to property taxes, other local taxes. That certainly was the room and meal coming in better than what was budgeted for fiscal year 11. Use of money in property came in largely due to the parking garage, about $50,000 higher in parking revenues over there. But overall, it was very successful on the revenue side. There will be some considerations for the accruals. We know that sales tax for education will need to be accrued for 2 months, also utility taxes for 2 months, and then other for a minimum of about $310,000. That's a conservative number. I'm sure it'll be a little more. Looking at the expenditures, again on a cash basis, overall the expenditures were under budget, $2.3 million. And these are the major categories according to what's in the budget, the way they're budgeted. General government administration is under budget largely because all of the contingency funds were not spent for the year, so that's the majority of that. Judicial is under because there's still some bills to be coming in for the courthouse. Public safety, $804,000 under budget. There's a lot of accruals that need to be made for payroll and associated benefits for that, but there were some savings also from delaying filling positions for police and fire, mostly police. And generally, there were a few positions around the city where filling positions were delayed, which is reflected in certain categories up here also. Health and welfare, public assistance fund did not need all of the money that was allocated as a transfer between the general fund and that fund for the year. Community development, the $378,000, that's the majority of that is the WADMAC money. It's the pass-through, and it all didn't come in, so it all didn't go out. But just to recap, expenditures were $2.3 million under budget. Looking at it another way, the three major ways we also showed in the budget document. Salaries and benefits overall were under $704,000. The operating, which was more than twice that figure, was under budget $1.5 million. And then capital, some savings there was achieved by pretty much deferring some of the equipment purchases in the departmental budgets. And then we'll have to consider the expenditures. We have to accrue 9 days of the payroll from the July 1 payroll that went out last week, about $325,000, including associated Social Security taxes, and then somewhere around $900,000, I'm estimating, for additional accruals across all the departments in the general fund, for a total of about $1,225,000 that will have to be added to the expenditure side. And if you take all those into consideration, the total estimated revenues, $32.1 million, and the expenditures, comparing that with $30.1, estimating a little over $2 million surplus for the operations for the year, and that surplus as a percentage of revenues is just over 6% for the year. The sales tax fund, which is the capital projects fund, as you know, this does not account for the in and out monies on bond refinancing last year. I didn't want to confuse any situation, so I pulled it out, but the total revenues are very close to $4.9 million. Projects that we have paid for already, 6.1. We'll probably accrue about $1.5 million, and the majority of that's the renovation on the municipal building. Total expenditures of $7.6 million. The difference there is $2.7 million. That is a use of reserves, so the operating surplus will help to resolve the situation where we've spent more on the capital side, and that happens every year. Okay. And then looking at the reserves, beginning fund balance, June 30th, 2010 audited figure was $25.9 million, broken down in these former classifications, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But if we add in the revenues for the year, take out the expenditures, the estimate for the end of FY11 will be about $25.27 million. So it's about a $700,000 reduction from last year. Okay, and then estimated fund balance, and these are, if you'll remember last month, you all approved the new fund balance policy. These are the new GASB 54 classifications. We'll have some minor prepaids here that will be called non-spendable, a couple of assigned categories for health care, and the $4 million or so that will carry over for capital projects from the prior year. The residual goes into an unassigned category of $21 million. So that's how the fund balance would pan out that way. Okay? And looking at that unassigned, that would be about 65% of the operating revenues for the year, well above the 35% reserve level of the fund balance policy that the city has. Okay? And then this is the graph that you've seen for a few years now, and I think Jack wanted to talk a little bit on this.
Yeah, just, of course, this graph is wonderful for kind of looking at all of this from 20,000 or 30,000 feet, and what it shows is that with the performance, the estimated performance in fiscal 2011 of about $2 million to the good, it puts us back in the range that we were last year, and the range we were from FY08 on back. Of course, the 1 year where when the recession hit us, there was a very, very small surplus that year of a couple $100,000. So this graph kind of puts it in historic context, and then you see the budget for next year with revenues being estimated approximately where they are. They actually came in this year, and spending at that same level. So I want to say that I'm very happy both on the revenue side. We did do better in some of our local taxes than what's anticipated. That made up for some losses in some other areas, so we came out a little ahead on revenue. But the main thing is that, again, the departments have been disciplined, cautious, as they always are, but it showed up again this year by underspending their budgets whenever they can. And it's important that we maintain a culture where our departments and department heads are deliberately doing all they can, never to spend money simply because it is budgeted, but to spend it because you really need it and you need it now, and know that you won't be penalized and lose the ability to take care of that need in the future if you do defer spending. So I think that, again, that's a culture, that's a philosophy. It's always been part of the city of Williamsburg. I found it that way when I got here, and it's something that has maintained itself, and it really makes a difference, I think, in terms of our performance each year.
Thank you very much. I think another important part of that culture, too, is that maintaining that fiscal discipline while preserving the quality of services that the city provides. And I think those two dimensions to that culture of the city are really critical. And I think both you and Phil and all the department heads deserve a lot of credit for your efforts on the behalf of everybody in the cities, and we thank you. Does anybody have questions, comments?
Comment and question. The comment is, not only are we preserving the quality of service that's provided to the citizens, but staff has also done a terrific job in maintaining the proper quality of infrastructure throughout the community, which in tough times can be very easy to push on to another year, another decade, and that can create enormous problems for the future. And I think staff has done a terrific job of avoiding that temptation and continuing to keep basic functioning of the city's parts as opposed to the people in good shape. The one thing that always I don't like about this graph is it's one apple and a crate of oranges, because we're comparing results, actual results. The one estimated result I understand because we don't have all the data yet, but then we're comparing it to a projection, and the projection is a very different comparison. And I'm wondering if it's possible in future years to look at this with the actual years and then the estimate of the end of the current fiscal year, and then to overlay on top of that what the budgets were over those years with expenses and revenues, because then we can see how those estimates really, or the budgets compared with what we actually did. Because otherwise that fiscal year 12 comparison isn't really as meaningful. So I just would ask for you to consider that if it's not too much work. It might be a little more confusing, so maybe it could be a second graph that follows this
We
one.
do have that in tabular form,
Right.
but we could try to graph it out and see how that would work.
Put in a blue line for actual budget for each year, and then the final year it would end up all three dots being the same.
I think you need two more lines, because you need to budget expenses and revenue.
Well, that's true, because sometimes there is a small gap between but I think if we simply the budgeted revenue for that year, or the budget, pick one of the other.
That difference is not going to show up on
It'd
be close enough, but that would be helpful.
I mean, that's, we basically have balanced budgets within minuscule fractions.
And maybe one or two last comments. I know all staff in the city are doing a terrific job with expenses, expense control. Mr. Serra, your ability to estimate or to, what future revenues and future expenses are is simply remarkable. And the degree, the percentage variance on what you estimate what actually comes in is it's so small. It's hard to imagine how you do it so well. We did seem to have a fairly large gap, though, maybe 10% or more in what we were expecting on the pass-through, the $2 hotel fee. Could you talk a little bit about that and how it might be affecting your thinking for the coming year?
Let me start, because he's got a questioning look on his face. There was a point in time when we estimated, I think it was 1.8 million on that. It was clearly too high. We dropped the estimate back to 1.5 million. That is still too high now. So we could pull that back. We've held it at the 1.5, knowing that if the revenue is less, the expenditures are less, so it doesn't affect the bottom line. But to give a truer sense of that budget for comparison purposes, the more accurate you get, the better.
I guess the question then is, was that just a function of how we've been doing the budget and keeping those numbers fairly level, or is it more a reflection of the economy, the hotel economy didn't perform as well as we expected it would?
Yeah, but I think that number would have been very, very close to the 1.5 back in 2008, and we've simply left it there. And so it probably would make sense in the future budgets to pull it back down 1.2, 1.3, something in that range.
If I may follow up. I mean, it seems to me that you are estimating the room tax and you're estimating the $2 tax. And what, this is not a question for an answer, but what's the nature of the relationship between the estimates of those two? Because clearly we've underestimated room tax, we overestimated $2 tax. So thinking about that, and Phil's been very open to some students at college helping him with some estimating techniques, and this might be an area where that could be useful too. So
and we've looked at that a little bit in the past, and it certainly is a function of the cost of the rooms, the room night sales, dollars per room, and all that. So we have thought about that.
Yeah.
I think the simple answer is we're paying as close attention as we can to the full room tax. The $2 pass-through, because it's a pass-through, has not affected the city's bottom line at all, so the budget number isn't very important there. But for sake of just making things as close as you can, we ought to trim it up. I agree with that.
And I might add, the room and meal numbers shown here, those are 12 months. Again, they're the wrong 12 months because we'll be adding Julys and deducting out last Julys. And if we're doing better, which the trend is we are, those numbers could go up a little bit.
Great. Scott, do you?
Take this entire presentation and cast it, knowing these things, interacting in the community, consistently here, day-to-day services have remained the same. And, so in the back of my mind, I know we're doing more with less, and I still consistently hear praise. So I'm overall very impressed. Thank you.
Thanks.
On this chart, when we were sitting here, I wasn't here last year, but when we sat here last year and looked at this presentation, what we now list as an estimate for 2011, those dots were pretty close. And I think each year as you go back, those dots were always a little closer. And I wonder if that doesn't allow for an opportunity as we go into the next budget cycle that maybe when we set the budget, we hone it in a little bit more to get those numbers a little closer. Because, again, as I sit here today and think forward to next July, I'm sure what we budgeted for 2012 will come in similar to the rest of the previous years. But to this chart, Phil or Jack, do you do any estimation 5 years out to kind of project what revenues may be and what expenses may be? Because clearly expenses are going to continue to rise, and so do you project an increase in revenue, and then how do you justify the increase, or how do you make that prediction and increase in revenue?
I will say that we do the projections on the capital fund, as you well know, at the budget retreats. We also do it on the utility fund for the water rate analysis. The general fund is very difficult because it changes so much. There's a lot of things, some very large items that you just can't predict, like health care. Every 2 years you have a VRS change. Mm-hmm. So we can do it. I just don't know how accurate. I don't know how worthwhile it would be to go out more than 2 years.
I think that if we were to attempt it, we would simply take a factor, whether it was a 2% growth factor or 1%, and show that out, because we don't have any better information to really project what we think our revenues are going to be, other than to tie it to what we think might happen in the general economy. And so the approach we've taken is to say we will take actions and adopt policies to ensure that expenditures do not exceed revenues. Now, so we take that as an assumption that we will operate in the black or better. And then the question is, what is our projected capital spending, and then what does that do to the bottom line? Sure. So that's the 5-year projection we do now. And if we were to take the 2% growth factor, we'd be probably growing expenditures at the same level, so you would end up at the same place.
Sure. And I guess from my perspective, when I look at my own business, it's always good to look forward and kind of have that 5-year projection, because it also sets a goal. And I understand that we're not talking about traditional commerce when we look at municipal revenue, but there is a direct correlation to our revenue from a municipal perspective to how well the economy is doing in the city. And since we do make such a significant investment in tourism promotion particularly, there's a correlation. And so how well those monies are being spent and being productive in terms of expenditures would affect the revenue. And so I think it might be a helpful tool for at least council to have. So,
would it be better to do that for components rather than for the total? I mean, it seems to me you could do estimates of, say, real estate taxes or room and meal taxes. I mean, the whole gets difficult because of the things. But the components, some of the components are less subject to those types of variations. So the direction to go may be to do estimates of some of those components, and then go back to Jack's point that you're always going to you're never going to let expenditures exceed revenues, and here are projections for some major revenue categories where we can project those.
I think the question too is the exercise about setting targets, or is it about setting estimates and expectations. So they're two slightly different things. And I hear what Mr. Pond's saying is perhaps that you could set some revenue targets that could be a useful exercise all by itself, even if you didn't tie that back then to an overall budget target.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Judy?
I just, back to the little gap between those two lines, I'm very happy with that little gap between the two lines. It's very nice to have a surplus. When I had my own little business, I used to have some board members who used to ask me if it was legal to have a surplus when you were running things, and I kept saying, it's good to have a surplus. You need to have a surplus. So I agree with Mr. Foster. It's to keep the city services going and to keep that kind of expenditure rate is really remarkable. So thank you.
Yes, our saving rate is 6.3%. The rest of the country needs to match us. Thank you. Thank you, Jack. City attorney reports?
I have nothing further.
Nothing? Okay. Any unfinished business? I don't think so. I think new business, I believe we have one appointment to board and commission.
We do. Mr. Mayor? I move that effective August 1st, 2011, City Council reappoint Jack Tuttle to the Quarterpath Community Development Authority for a 4-year term to expire July 31st, 2015.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Knutson?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Farley?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
This brings us to our final agenda item for the day, which is open forum. This is a time where anyone who wishes to address council on any matter may do so. If you wish to address council on any matter, please come forward, state your name and address. Seeing no takers, I think that brings us to the end of our regular business, but I believe we have something for closed session.
Yes, we do. Mr. Mayor, I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning staff evaluation.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Knutson?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Farley?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
We'll take a 5-minute recess.